In our last video, a 7-ton rock turned Ohio's sky white, and 4 days later, Houston rattled with a sonic boom from another one. No warnings, no detections. 2 cities in 4 days. Then, California's sky turned green on March 22nd. A fireball, visible across 3 states, burning with the chemical signature of superheated metal, moving at 35,000 miles per hour. It was the 3rd fireball over the United States in 6 days. And then, while this video was being made, a 4th appeared over Ohio. Ohio, Houston, California, Ohio again. 4 rocks from space in 7 days. Every single one invisible to every detection system we operate until the moment it arrived and announced itself with light and sound. And the official explanation, issued within hours of the California event, is that these are unrelated sporadic meteoroids. Random. Coincidental. Nothing to connect them. The lab results that could actually confirm that are still pending. The chemical fingerprints of the Ohio fragments have not been published. The answer exists. It is just being held in a database somewhere, quietly. That detail changes everything about how you read this story. Stay with me. Hit subscribe and stay close, because this story has not finished writing itself. The detection gap is still open, meaning the next one might arrive exactly the way the last 4 did. Without warning. The Ohio lab results are pending. The Houston rock is unconfirmed. And when that data lands, this channel is where you'll hear it first. No hype, no panic, just the actual evidence. You'll want to be here for that. Now, let's get into it. Something hit the sky over Ohio on the night of March 23rd, 2026. A security camera mounted on a quiet suburban house captured it. One moment, a dark and ordinary night, and then a sudden streak of white light tearing across the frame, bright enough to throw shadows, visible across multiple states. No warning, no announcement, just light and then nothing. And here's the thing you need to understand before we go any further. This was not the Ohio event you may have already heard about. That one happened on March 17th. This is a different one, a 4th one. And the fact that you might have needed me to clarify that, the fact that there have now been enough fireballs over the United States in a single week that we need to keep track of which Ohio event we are talking about, that, right there, is the entire story. Let me lay it out for you in plain terms, because the timeline alone is something you need to sit with. On March 17th, a fireball exploded over Ohio in the middle of the day. Seismic sensors picked it up. Windows rattled. Scientists estimated the object weighed somewhere between 6 and 7 tons, roughly the size of a small car, and fragments were actually recovered from the ground. Real rocks. Chunks of asteroid that had been drifting through the solar system for billions of years. And then they landed in Ohio on a Tuesday. On March 21st, another fireball detonated over Houston, Texas, estimated at around 1 ton. A sonic boom rattled the city. Doppler weather radar, the same technology used to track storms, picked up a debris field in the atmosphere. 4 days after that, on March 22nd, a brilliant green fireball blazed across the skies of California, lighting up 3 states and generating nearly 240 eyewitness reports within hours. And then, the very next night, March 23rd, that footage from Ohio. Again, 4 fireballs, 7 days, same country, none of them detected before entry. Every single one confirmed only after it had already exploded. Now, NASA moved quickly after the California event. They released a statement saying, the fireball, quote, does not appear to be related to other recent meteors. And on the surface, that sounds reassuring. Separate events, separate explanations, nothing to worry about. But I want you to hold that sentence in your mind for a moment, because we are going to come back to it, and by the time we do, it is going to sound very different to you. I am not here to tell you something sinister is happening. I am not here to spin a conspiracy. What I am here to do is ask the question that the data itself is forcing us to ask. Because there is a point at which independent coincidences stop being a satisfying explanation. There is a threshold where the pattern itself becomes the information. And the question I keep returning to, the one I cannot stop thinking about while looking at this timeline, is this. At what point does coincidence become a signal? We are going to explore why California is different from the other events. We are going to take NASA's language apart word by word, and we are going to look at what the lab data on recovered fragments might actually tell us. Data that, as of right now, has not been made public. But first, let us zoom in on that green fireball, because what happened over California on the night of March 22nd was not a typical event, and the details matter more than you might think. The fireball appeared at approximately 8:19 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on March 22nd, 2026, and it entered the atmosphere at a speed of roughly 35,000 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, that is approximately 45 times the speed of sound. Mach 45. At that velocity, the air in front of the object cannot move out of the way fast enough. It compresses. It heats. And the object, whatever it was, began to glow with a light bright enough to be seen across California, Nevada, and Arizona simultaneously. It first became visible at an altitude of about 49 miles above Earth's surface, which is already above the layer of the atmosphere where most weather happens. It traveled approximately 58 miles through the sky before it stopped existing as a single object, disintegrating at an altitude of around 29 miles. The whole event lasted about 5 seconds. 5 seconds of light, from horizon to disintegration, and then it was over. The color is worth pausing on. Green fireballs are not random. That particular shade of green is produced by the ionization of specific elements, primarily magnesium and nickel, burning as the object superheats. When you see a fireball that color, it is not just pretty. It is information. It is the atmosphere reading the chemistry of the rock out loud, in light, at 45 times the speed of sound. Nearly 240 reports flooded into the American Meteor Society within hours. Reports came from as far apart as Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. And for a 5-second event to generate that kind of response, across that kind of geographic spread, the object had to have been genuinely large. This was not a grain of sand. This was not the kind of micro debris that burns up silently every single night without anyone noticing. The brightness of a fireball is not just about proximity. It scales with the energy of the object, with its mass and its speed, and this one was burning intensely enough to light up the desert Southwest. Here is a subtle detail that I want you to file away, because we will need it later. The California object disintegrated at around 29 miles altitude. The Ohio object on March 17th, different trajectory, different entry angle, different composition, broke apart at a similar altitude range, somewhere around 30 miles. Same fragmentation zone, roughly, despite completely different approach vectors. That might be nothing. Atmospheric pressure and density at that altitude range is a natural limiter for objects of a certain size and strength. But it is an interesting overlap when you are staring at a cluster of events and trying to decide what is noise and what is signal. There was no confirmed sonic boom over California, unlike Ohio and Houston. No Doppler radar detected a debris field. No fragments have been recovered. Scientists classified it as a, quote, sporadic meteoroid, meaning it was not associated with any known meteor shower. No predicted event. No calendar entry. It just arrived. And I know that the word sporadic sounds like it means random, like it is the scientific way of saying nothing to see here. Move along. But that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this story. and I want to pull it apart carefully later, because it does not mean what most people think it means. For now, the more pressing question is this. If these events are truly independent, if there is genuinely no connection between Ohio and Houston and California, and Ohio again, then why did NASA feel the need to say so? The statement NASA released after the California fireball was brief, clinical, measured. It confirmed the event, provided the basic trajectory data, and then added a phrase that, to most readers, probably registered as routine reassurance. The fireball, they said, does not appear to be related to other recent meteors. Read it quickly, and you move on. Read it slowly, and it starts to raise questions. Does not appear to be. Not is not. Not confirmed, unrelated. Does not appear to be. That is the language of scientific caution, and scientists choose their words with surgical precision, especially in official public communications. When a scientist says something does not appear to be the case, they are leaving a door open. They are saying, based on what we currently have, this is our working assessment. They are explicitly not saying they are certain. Now, you might argue that I am overreading a routine press release. Fair point. Scientists are cautious about everything, not just the dramatic stuff. But here's what makes this particular phrasing notable. NASA does not usually comment on whether fireball events are related to each other. Go look at the American Meteor Society's archive. Go look at past NASA fireball reports. The standard template is trajectory, entry speed, estimated energy yield, maybe a note on visibility range. That is it. There is no habitual practice of appending a line saying, by the way, this has nothing to do with that other thing. That framing only appears when there is a reason to address the connection. And the only reason to address a connection is if the connection has become obvious enough to require addressing. This is what I call institutional minimalism. It is not a conspiracy. It is not a cover-up. It is the very human, very understandable tendency of official scientific bodies to provide the minimum necessary framing to prevent public panic while staying technically accurate. What it does, unintentionally, is create a more interesting signal than silence would have. If these were truly random independent events with no statistical anomaly worth discussing, the statement would simply not mention the other events at all. The fact that it does, the fact that someone at NASA sat down and decided the public needed to be told these things are probably not connected, tells you that someone at NASA noticed that they looked connected. And here is the tension that I cannot resolve neatly. NASA has access to data that you and I do not. They have trajectory models, isotopic analysis pipelines, orbital computation tools that can, in principle, trace an object's path backward through the solar system and determine where it came from. If they have run those numbers and they show no shared origin point, then their statement is simply correct, and the pattern is genuinely coincidental. But if those numbers are still being processed, if the lab results are still pending, which they are, then the statement is not a conclusion. It is a placeholder. And placeholders in science have a way of getting quietly updated when no one is paying attention. What NASA is not summarizing publicly is a larger data set, one that goes well beyond the United States. And once you see the full picture, the word coincidence starts to feel like it is carrying more weight than it can bear. Let us zoom out, because the story is bigger than America. On March 8, 2026, a meteorite struck a house in Koblenz, Germany. Not landed nearby, not fell in a field, hit a building. Confirmed fragments were recovered. On approximately March 2nd, another fireball event was reported over Louisiana, and days later, March 3rd, another over the Pacific Northwest. And then, starting March 17th, the sequence we have already walked through. Ohio, Houston, California, Ohio again, all compressed into 7 days. pull back and look at that as a single timeline. From roughly March 2nd to March 23rd, you have at least 7 significant fireball or meteorite events across 2 continents. 21 days. That is not a typical distribution. Here is the context that makes that number meaningful. Confirmed meteorite falls, events where material from space actually reaches the ground and is recovered, happen approximately 5 to 10 times per year globally. That is the baseline. That is the long-term average across decades of record keeping. 5 to 10 per year means roughly 1 every 5 to 10 weeks. What the first 3 weeks of March 2026 appear to have produced is multiple confirmed or probable falls within a single month, with at least 2 of them striking structures, a house in Germany and a roof in Houston, pending final confirmation on the Houston Rock. 2 house strikes in under 2 weeks on different continents. The statistical rarity of a meteorite hitting any building at all is extreme. The global human footprint covers only a small fraction of Earth's surface. Most meteors that survive entry land in ocean or unpopulated land, or simply are never found. A building strike is an outlier event. 2 building strikes in 13 days from apparently independent objects with no shared radiant is the kind of thing that makes planetary scientists pause. And I want to be precise here, because this matters. The fireball sightings, the ones captured on cameras and reported to the American Meteor Society, those numbers can be inflated by awareness. When one fireball makes the news, people start looking up. Suddenly, every satellite re-entry and SpaceX launch gets reported as a mysterious light. The reporting rate goes up without the actual event rate necessarily following. That is a real bias, and we have to account for it. But the physical evidence, the seismic readings in Ohio, the Doppler radar returns in Houston, the recovered fragments in Germany, the actual rocks sitting in labs right now, that evidence cannot be explained by people looking up more often. That is material. That is real. And that brings us to a vulnerability in our understanding of the sky above us that most people do not realize exists. One that makes all of this not just strange, but genuinely unsettling. Here is something that does not get discussed enough in mainstream coverage of these events. Every single fireball in the sequence, Ohio, Houston, California, Ohio again, arrived without any prior detection whatsoever. Not a few hours of warning, not a last-minute alert, 0, nothing. Each object was completely invisible to every telescope and tracking system on Earth, right up until the moment it hit the atmosphere and announced itself with light and sound. The Ohio object on March 17th was estimated at roughly 6 feet across. The Houston object was closer to 3 feet. These are small objects by asteroid standards, and our planetary defense systems are not designed to catch them. The threshold for detection by most survey programs is objects large enough to cause regional or global catastrophe, things hundreds of meters across. Below roughly 30 to 50 meters, you are largely invisible until you arrive. You could fit the Ohio object in a standard parking space, and it crossed the entire solar system without tripping a single alarm. Part of this is technology. Part of it is geometry. There is a specific region of space from which objects are essentially impossible to detect before impact, and it is called the sunward blind spot. Telescopes cannot look directly at or near the sun without destroying their sensors. Objects approaching Earth from the general direction of the sun are hidden in that glare for the final weeks or days of their approach. They emerge from the light and immediately hit us. Scientists who work in planetary defense are fully aware of this gap. It is documented. It is discussed in conference papers. It is acknowledged in NASA's own planetary defense assessments. The Vera Rubin Observatory and proposed space-based infrared telescopes are specifically designed to help address it. But right now, in March 2026, the gap is still open. What the pattern of the last 3 weeks is revealing is not just a statistical curiosity. It is a live demonstration of that vulnerability. Each of these objects, regardless of what they are or where they came from, walked through a door in our detection network that we know exists and cannot yet close. That is the story underneath the fireballs. Not the light shows, as spectacular as they are, but the silence that preceded them. And the silence before each event is made stranger by what we are about to look at next. The classification that is supposed to explain all of this, and why, when you examine it closely, it explains almost nothing at all. Let us talk about the word sporadic, because it keeps appearing in official descriptions of these events, and it is doing a lot of work while actually saying very little. When scientists classify a fireball as a sporadic meteoroid, what they mean is technically precise. This object does not appear to be associated with any known meteor shower. That is the definition. A meteor shower happens when Earth passes through a specific debris trail left behind by a comet. And the meteors in that shower all appear to radiate from the same point in the sky. The radiant point, because they are all traveling along the same orbital path. A sporadic does not have that. It comes from a different direction, one that does not match any cataloged stream. Here is where the misconception creeps in. Sporadic does not mean random origin. It does not mean the object appeared from nowhere, conjured from nothing, unrelated to anything else in the solar system. What it means is that we have not yet identified what it came from. The background population of space debris, the rocks and chunks that are not part of any named stream, that are not affiliated with any tracked comet or asteroid family, is enormous. There's a vast, poorly mapped reservoir of material orbiting the Sun, material that has been gravitationally shuffled and scattered over billions of years into orbits that do not fit neatly into any catalog. Sporadic is less a description of the object's origin and more an admission of our ignorance about it. The problem with using that label to explain away a cluster of events is that it only addresses classification, not causality. Saying that multiple high-energy events are all sporadic is like saying a dozen unexplained power outages across a city all have different serial numbers on the fuses. True, technically, but not an explanation for why the lights went out in the first place. These were not faint meteors. These were objects large enough to produce sonic booms, to deposit material on the ground, to rattle buildings. The typical sporadic meteor that burns up silently at 2 in the morning without anyone noticing is a millimeter-scale grain of dust. These events are orders of magnitude more energetic, and lumping them into the same sporadic category as those invisible dust particles is a classification that fits but does not satisfy. And here's the real question that the sporadic label sidesteps entirely. Even if every one of these objects came from a different origin point, even if none of them shared a parent body, why are they all arriving at the same time? The orbits of sporadic meteoroids should be distributed across the solar system. Their Earth encounters spread more or less uniformly across the calendar. The temporal clustering we're seeing, the compression of multiple high-energy events into 3 weeks, is not something that the sporadic classification was designed to address. It describes what each object is not. It says nothing at all about why they all showed up together. If these fireballs were part of a meteor shower, this would all be much simpler to explain. Meteor showers are predictable. They have names, they have dates, they have radiant points, specific locations in the sky from which all the meteors in the shower appear to originate, like light expanding outward from a single source. The Perseids come from Perseus. The Leonids come from Leo. You know where to look, and you know when to look, and when you see them, you know exactly why they are there. But Ohio, Houston, and California did not share a radiant. When scientists traced the entry trajectories of these 3 objects backward through the atmosphere and up into space, They did not converge on the same point in the sky. They came from different directions, different orbital inclinations, different approach vectors. The standard meteor shower model, Earth moving through a single discrete debris trail, does not fit the data. What this means is that if there is any connection between these events, it cannot be explained by simple orbital mechanics the way a shower can. A shower is a stream. These look more like what you might call a scatter field, multiple objects arriving from distributed directions that do not share an obvious common ancestor, at least not one that is visible in the conventional radiant analysis. And this is where the explanation starts to get genuinely interesting, because there is a mechanism, not confirmed, not proven, but scientifically coherent, by which a single source could produce exactly this kind of scattered, multi-directional arrival pattern, a mechanism that involves the largest planet in the solar system and an object that arrived from beyond it relatively recently. But before we get there, we need to dispose of one more alternative explanation, the one that sounds the most reasonable on the surface and falls apart the fastest under scrutiny. When a fireball makes the news, something predictable happens. People start looking up. And when people start looking up, they start reporting things they would have otherwise ignored. Satellites, aircraft, lens flares, atmospheric optical effects, SpaceX launches. The reporting volume goes up, and suddenly it feels like the sky is raining fire, even when the actual rate of events has not changed at all. This is a real phenomenon. Scientists call it observational bias, and it is one of the first things you have to rule out when you see an apparent cluster of unusual events. So let us rule it out properly, because the data in this case is unusually cooperative. The Ohio fireball on March 17th was detected by seismic sensors. Ground-based instruments, completely automated, with no human observer required, registered the pressure wave from the detonation. That is not someone looking up and seeing something scary. That is a seismometer doing its job. The Houston event on March 21st was tracked by Doppler weather radar. The same network that forecasts your evening rain picked up the debris field in the atmosphere. Again, no human interpretation required. No cultural moment of looking up and seeing monsters. Just a radar return. And the recovered fragments in Germany, and the rocks pulled from the ground in Ohio, those are physical objects sitting on laboratory benches. You cannot report bias a meteorite into existence. The fireball sighting numbers, the 240 reports from California, the multi-state witnesses from Ohio, those could be inflated by heightened awareness. But the instruments are not susceptible to that inflation. The seismometers did not suddenly start registering more events because people were nervous about space. The Doppler radar did not get anxious. The lab specimens did not materialize because someone on social media said the sky was falling. What this means is that whatever is driving the apparent increase in energetic events, it is not perception. It is not anxiety. It is not a population of people who suddenly became interested in meteor videos after the first Ohio event and started finding them everywhere. Something physically real is producing physically real results. And there is one anomaly in the data that makes that conclusion harder to ignore than anything else we have discussed so far. On March 8th, 2026, a meteorite punched through the roof of a house in Koblenz, Germany. Not metaphorically, not nearby, through the roof. Physical damage to a structure occupied by people, caused by a rock from space. Confirmed fragments were recovered. The event is documented. A few days later, in Houston, Texas, a rock fell through a residential roof. Laboratory confirmation is still pending as of this recording, but preliminary analysis points toward meteoritic origin. Two separate incidents, under 2 weeks apart, on different continents, both involving rocks from space making contact with human-built structures. To understand why that is remarkable, you need to understand what the baseline probability of a building strike actually looks like. Earth's surface area is approximately 197 million square miles. The fraction of that covered by human-built structures is genuinely small. Estimates vary, but structures occupy something in the range of 1 to 2% of global land area, and land itself covers less than 30% of the surface. A meteorite falling randomly is overwhelmingly more likely to land in ocean, or desert, or forest, or just an open field than to hit a building. The documented history of confirmed meteorite building strikes over the past several centuries, numbers in the dozens at most. We are talking about one every few years, globally, and most of those are minor impacts on sheds or cars or fences. 2 in under 2 weeks is not a number that fits the historical distribution. And the fact that they occurred on different continents, not in the same geographic region where some shared local factor might apply, makes it harder to construct a scenario in which this is simply bad luck. Something produced an increased density of impactable material intersecting with Earth's orbit during this window. And the question of what that something is leads us directly to an object that was discovered last year. One that does not come from our solar system. One that passed through the inner solar system and then continued outward. And whose proximity to Jupiter in the days just before these events is either the most important coincidence in this whole story or the most important clue. In July of 2025, astronomers using the Atlas Survey telescope in Chile detected a faint object moving through the outer solar system at a velocity that did not make sense for anything born here. The orbital math was unambiguous. The object, formerly designated 3I Atlas, was moving too fast, at an angle too steep relative to the plane of the solar system, to be gravitationally bound to the Sun. It was passing through, a visitor from interstellar space. The third confirmed interstellar object ever detected in our solar system, following the famous Oumuamua in 2017 and Borisov in 2019. 3I Atlas reached its closest point to the Sun, perihelion, in October of 2025, and then began its outbound journey, the long arc back into interstellar space, that it will travel for millions of years after it leaves us. By December of 2025, it made its closest approach to Earth, close enough for the James Webb Space Telescope to study it in detail. And then it continued outward, toward Jupiter. On March 16, 2026, 3I Atlas made its closest approach to Jupiter. The very next day, March 17th, a fireball exploded over Ohio. I'm going to be very precise about what I am claiming here, because this is the part where intellectual honesty matters most. That one-day gap is a correlation. Correlation is not causation. The proximity of 2 events in time does not prove they are connected. But the reason the timing is worth discussing is not because it proves anything. It is because it points toward a mechanism, a known gravitational process that could physically produce exactly the pattern we are observing. And that mechanism involves what Jupiter does to everything that comes near it. Jupiter is not a passive object sitting quietly in the outer solar system. It is the gravitational heavyweight of the solar system, a planet so massive that its influence reshapes the orbits of everything that passes near it. Comets, asteroids, and debris clouds that venture close to Jupiter do not simply fly by unchanged. They get pushed. Their trajectories bend. Orbital energies shift. Some objects get captured into the inner solar system. Others get accelerated outward and ejected. And crucially for our story, some objects that pass through a diffuse debris cloud around a comet can get scattered in multiple directions, simultaneously, like a billiard break, each fragment sent on a slightly different orbital path. The hypothesis that connects 3I Atlas to the fireball cluster goes like this. As 3I Atlas passed through the inner solar system in late 2025 and early 2026, it was, as confirmed by telescope observations, actively shedding material, outgassing, releasing debris. And as it moved toward Jupiter in early 2026, some of that dispersed material, particles, and chunks moving on slightly different trajectories than the main object, may have had their orbits perturbed by Jupiter's gravity. Not violently, not dramatically, just nudged, slightly, toward the inner solar system in a scattered pattern rather than a coherent stream. Which is exactly what you would get if you asked a physicist to design a mechanism that could produce a cluster of sporadic fireballs arriving from different directions, all within a window of a few weeks. I want to say this plainly. This is speculative. This is not a confirmed explanation. This is a hypothesis that fits the data we have, without contradicting any of the data we have, while remaining unproven by direct evidence. It is the kind of idea that lives in the space between what we know and what we can test. But here's the thing about speculative hypotheses. They only stay speculative until someone runs the numbers, does the lab analysis, and either confirms or destroys them. And right now, someone is doing exactly that. When the James Webb Space Telescope turned its instruments on 3I Atlas during the December 2025 close approach, it found something more interesting than a cold, inert rock on a hyperbolic trajectory. The telescope detected carbon dioxide, water ice, and carbon monoxide in the coma around the object, the cloud of material being released as the comet heated up near the sun. This confirmed what the optical brightening already suggested. 3I Atlas was not just passing through, it was actively falling apart. Active outgassing in a comet is normal. What made the findings notable was the scale. The object brightened unexpectedly in the weeks around perihelion, beyond what standard models predicted, based on its size and composition. Unexpected brightening means unexpected mass loss. More material released than the models anticipated. A cloud of debris, larger than expected, dispersed along and around the comet's trajectory, following it through the solar system like a wake. The James Webb data gave us a comet that was shedding more than it should have been, and a comet shedding more material than expected means more debris in the inner solar system than baseline predictions would account for. Now, whether any of that debris is arriving at Earth right now, whether the rocks falling over Ohio and Houston and California have any isotopic connection to an interstellar comet, is a question that cannot be answered by telescope observations alone. It requires laboratory analysis of recovered fragments. It requires measuring the isotope ratios of the oxygen and carbon and other elements in those rocks. Because isotope ratios are cosmic fingerprints, chemical signatures that can tell you where in the galaxy a rock was formed. Material from our solar system has a characteristic isotope ratio. Material formed around a different star, in a different part of the galaxy, can have a detectably different ratio, and the Ohio fragments, the ones sitting in labs right now, have been through exactly that kind of analysis. The results are pending, but they exist. The answer, or at least a major clue toward it, is already in a database somewhere, waiting to be published. And when those results come out, they will either close this story or crack it wide open. There is a version of this story that resolves cleanly. The isotopic analysis of the Ohio fragments comes back normal. Standard solar system ratios. Nothing anomalous. The objects are confirmed as background sporadic meteoroids with no unusual provenance. The cluster is attributed to statistical noise, and everyone moves on. That is a real possibility, and it is the most likely single outcome if you are simply playing the base rates. But there is another version. The isotopes come back anomalous. Not definitively interstellar, the analysis is rarely that binary, but shifted. Off ratio in a way that suggests an origin point outside the sun's immediate neighborhood. Not proof, but a signal. A flag that says, this rock was not formed here, and we need to look harder at where it came from. That version of the story does not end the investigation. It begins a second, more intense one. What makes this genuinely unusual is that the question is testable. In most cases, where people argue about anomalous cosmic events, the evidence required to settle the argument simply does not exist. You cannot go back and rerun a supernova. You cannot catch a neutrino burst in real time without an operational detector pointed in the right direction. But here, the rocks are real. They are on Earth. They are in labs. Isotope mass spectrometry is a mature technology. We have the evidence. We just have not published the results yet. There is something philosophically strange about being in that position, knowing that the answer to a genuinely important question exists, has been measured, is sitting in a data file, but has not yet been released into the world. The uncertainty is not cosmic. It is administrative. And that gap, small as it is exactly the space where the most interesting questions live right now. Before we go any further, we should be honest about the noise in this signal. Not everything that was reported as a fireball during this window was actually a fireball. One example that circulated widely online around the same period involved a bright object over Texas that, on closer inspection, turned out to be a SpaceX launch vehicle or re-entry, misidentified by people who were already primed to see meteors everywhere. There was also a separate report of an object over the central United States, described as moving in a way that was, and I quote from the social media posts, zigzagging. Let me be unambiguous about this. Meteors do not zigzag. They do not change direction mid-flight. They are ballistic objects. They enter the atmosphere on a fixed trajectory, and they follow it until they either slow down, fragment, or burn up. An object that appears to be changing direction is either a satellite, an aircraft, a drone, or a camera artifact. It is not a meteoroid, and treating it as one contaminates the dataset we need to make sense of the real events. This matters because the temptation, when you are looking at an unusual cluster of events, is to pull in everything that seems connected and build the biggest possible case. That impulse is understandable, but counterproductive. The actual cluster of events, Ohio, Houston, California, Ohio again, Germany, Louisiana, the Pacific Northwest, is already unusual enough to warrant serious attention without padding it with misidentified objects and video artifacts. The real story does not need embellishment. In fact, embellishment actively damages it, because the moment you include a dubious data point, you give critics the easiest possible exit. They dismiss the bad example, and in doing so, they imply the whole argument is similarly weak. So we strip it back. We keep only what is confirmed by instruments, by recovered material, by seismic readings and radar returns. And even with those conservative constraints, what remains is still a pattern that demands explanation. There is one more thread in this period's timeline that I want to raise, not because I am claiming it explains anything, but because its presence makes the whole picture stranger in a way that is hard to simply set aside. Between March 20th and 21st, 2026, Earth was struck by a significant geomagnetic storm, rated G3 on the standard 5-point scale. Solar wind speeds hit approximately 700 kilometers per second. Auroras were reported at latitudes well below their typical range. People in the American Midwest, in Central Europe, in northern Japan were seeing them. The sky was active in ways it typically is not. Now, to be completely clear, there is no established scientific mechanism by which a geomagnetic storm causes or increases meteorite impacts. Solar wind is charged particles. Meteors are rocks. These are different things. The connection, if there is one, is not direct and not proven by any research I'm aware of, but the temporal overlap is precise enough to be at least noted. The G3 storm peaked on March 20th and 21st. The Houston fireball was on March 21st. The California event followed on March 22nd. the second Ohio event on March 23rd. Whether this means anything at all is genuinely unknown. What it does do, psychologically, is create the very human experience of everything happening at once. The sky is glowing with auroras. Rocks are falling from space. Geomagnetic readings are elevated. Even if these phenomena are completely independent of each other, their convergence in a single week produces a sense of the universe being unusually present, unusually loud, unusually close. And that feeling, even when it is not backed by mechanism, is worth examining, because it is the feeling that drives people to look more carefully, to ask better questions, to pay attention to things that deserved attention all along. The story of this week in March 2026 is partly about fireballs and partly about what happens when the sky stops being background. Here is something that does not get discussed enough when these events unfold. NASA and the American Meteor Society are excellent at confirming individual events. They release trajectory data, entry angles, estimated energy yields. They are prompt, they are accurate, and they serve a real public function. What they do not do, structurally, institutionally, is aggregate across events and offer synthesizing narratives. They confirm facts. They do not tell stories. And in the absence of an official synthesizing narrative, the public fills the vacuum with its own stories, which range from the carefully reasoned to the completely unhinged. The fireballs of March 2026 generated a flood of online speculation within days. Some of it was careful and referenced peer-reviewed research on interstellar object debris fields. Some of it involved ancient prophecies and government mind control. Both of those things happened in the same comment sections, often on the same posts. And the reason both things could exist in the same space is that NASA's official communications, while technically accurate, left the larger pattern unaddressed. No agency stood up and said, "Yes, we noticed this cluster. Here is what we know. Here is what we do not know. Here is what we are testing. Here is when we expect results." That statement would have been enormously useful. It was not made. I am not being cynical about this. The absence of a synthesizing statement is not necessarily evidence of something being hidden. These agencies are under-resourced relative to the scope of what they monitor. The scientists doing isotopic analysis are not also writing public explainer threads. The communications pipeline between raw data and public narrative is genuinely slow and imperfect. But the practical result is an information vacuum. And nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. The narrative that fills that vacuum is not neutral. It is shaped by whoever speaks first and loudest. And right now, in the absence of official synthesis, the loudest voices are often the least careful ones, which is exactly why this conversation needs to be had carefully, with evidence, in public, before the story calcifies into something it is not. Let us pull back to the highest level and look at what we actually have. Each individual event in this cluster is scientifically explainable in isolation. The Ohio fireball was a small asteroid, composition consistent with common chondritic material, entry dynamics unremarkable, recovered fragments being analyzed. The Houston event was consistent with a small stone meteoroid. The California fireball was a sporadic entry with typical green ionization signature and no recovered fragments. Individually, each of these would not generate a second glance from the planetary science community. The rate of events globally, the base rate, does accommodate them one at a time. The pattern is what the base rate does not easily accommodate. Not the individual data points, but their compression in time, their geographic distribution across the United States specifically. The building strikes on separate continents, the absence of any prior detection for any of them, and the arrival timing relative to a known interstellar object's Jupiter encounter. None of those factors taken alone is sufficient evidence of anything. Together, they form a shape that looks different from background noise. The key insight here is that the pattern itself is data. This is not a rhetorical flourish. In science, a cluster of events that deviates from expected distributions is a legitimate signal that requires investigation, even when each individual event within the cluster has a mundane explanation. Epidemiologists know this. When cases of a rare disease cluster in a neighborhood, you investigate even if each individual case could theoretically have occurred anywhere. The clustering itself is the anomaly. What we are doing right now, by looking at this February to March 2026 window carefully, is treating the pattern as data. And that is not conspiratorial. That is scientific method. At this point in the investigation, there are 3 coherent explanations for what we have been watching, and I want to lay them out cleanly, without pretending any of them is proven, because none of them is. The first is pure statistical clustering. Rare events cluster in time, occasionally due to random chance. This is mathematically guaranteed to happen sometimes. The human brain is not well calibrated for distinguishing meaningful patterns from coincidental ones. We evolved to see patterns because patterns usually mean something important: a predator, a food source, a rival. We are pattern recognition machines, and we misfire. It is possible that March 2026 was simply the month where the long tail of the probability distribution happened to land, and that the cluster will not repeat, and in 5 years nobody will remember it, because there was nothing to remember. That is explanation 1. The second is a local debris density increase. Earth's orbit is not uniform in its debris environment. There are regions of higher and lower concentration of small objects, shaped over billions of years by planetary perturbations, by ancient collisions, by the gravitational dynamics of the solar system. It is possible that Earth is currently passing through a relatively dense patch of background debris, not connected to any single source, but representing an elevated local concentration in our orbital neighborhood. This would produce an elevated rate of impacts temporarily across a range of entry angles and compositions without any shared parent body. This explanation is consistent with all the data, and it does not require an interstellar origin. The third is interstellar debris, specifically material shed by 3I Atlas and gravitationally perturbed by Jupiter toward Earth's orbit. This is the most dramatic explanation, and the one with the most specific testable prediction. If this is correct, the isotopic ratios of the recovered fragments should show anomalous signatures inconsistent with solar system formation. If the lab results come back normal, this explanation is falsified. If they come back anomalous, the investigation deepens considerably. All 3 explanations are plausible. None of them is confirmed, and the honest, rational position is to hold all 3 simultaneously, while waiting for the evidence that can distinguish between them. The answer is not certainty in either direction. The answer is curiosity, carefully calibrated to the data we actually have. While this video was being produced, the footage from Ohio on the night of March 23rd arrived. Another streak of light across a security camera. Another event that nobody saw coming, detected by nobody with instruments, announced by nobody with authority, simply appearing in the sky over the same state that had been struck 6 days earlier, as if the script had one more line to deliver before the credits. We do not yet know what that object was. We do not yet know if it produced fragments. We do not yet know if it is connected to the others in any physical sense. What we do know is that it happened. And it's happening in the context of everything we have just walked through, is the kind of thing that is very difficult to attribute to coincidence and move on from cleanly. The isotopic results from Ohio will come. The trajectory analyses are ongoing. The interstellar hypothesis will either gain traction or be ruled out. Science will do what science does, which is to say, it will eventually produce an answer, slowly, carefully, with appropriate uncertainty bars. in language that the press release writers will then simplify beyond recognition. And in the meantime, the sky above you right now contains objects we cannot see, on trajectories we have not computed, approaching at velocities we cannot stop. Some of them are the size of houses. Some are the size of cars. Some are the size of the rock sitting in your driveway. And the only way we find out about most of them is when they arrive. Here's the thing about this story that I think is genuinely worth carrying with you. The fireballs themselves are not the crisis. Rocks have been falling on Earth for 4.5 billion years. The planet has managed. What is worth paying attention to is what the pattern reveals about the gap between the universe's behavior and our knowledge of it. Every one of those objects arrived undetected. Every one of them demonstrated, in light and sound and physical impact, that the space between what we monitor and what is actually out there is real and wide and full. The detection gap is not a technical failure waiting to be corrected by the next generation of telescopes. It is the fundamental condition of being a small planet in a large solar system, in a galaxy we have barely begun to map, surrounded by debris we do not track, produced by processes we are only beginning to understand. And if this week's pattern turns out to be random clustering, if the isotopes come back normal, and the probability analysis shows nothing unusual, and we file March 2026 under anomalous but unremarkable, then we will have learned something important anyway. We will have learned what a random cluster looks like from the inside. We will have felt the shape of coincidence pressed against our face. And we will have been reminded, briefly but vividly, that the sky is not the ceiling. It is the beginning. If this is random, it should stop soon. But it has not stopped yet.